Fundamental 5, continued, Chapter 5. Chapter 5, frequent small group purposeful talk about the learning. The fundamental practice of frequent small group purposeful talk about learning, FSGPT, is perhaps the most self-explanatory of the Fundamental 5 practices, yet it still requires explanation. It is the practice where after every 10 to 15 minutes of teacher-driven discussion, or the completion of a major instructional concept, whichever comes first, the teacher briefly stops talking and has groups of 2 to 4 students, hence the term small group, briefly discuss a seed question related to the instruction or the instructional activity. Keep in mind, this is not a long conversation, nor is it an unstructured one. It is a focused micro discussion lasting between 30 seconds and 3 minutes, with the structure for this fundamental practice provided by the teacher in 4 ways. This structure is made up of frequency, the group size, the seed question, and the power zone. Frequency. The FSGPT structural component of frequency is created when the teacher plans for, allows, and then manages regular student discussions. Again, the rule of thumb is to provide for student discussion after every 10 to 15 minutes of teacher talk. This gives the students the opportunity to briefly discuss what they have learned. The power of these discussions will be covered in the ensuing paragraphs of this chapter. Group size. Group size makes up one of the FSGPT structural components. The teacher simply groups students in groups of 2 to 4. 2 students is, of course, the minimum size of a group. Due to the fact that it requires at least 2 people to have a conversation. But note that the maximum recommended group size is 4 students. When more than 4 students are in a group, the teacher introduces 2 potentially disadvantageous variables. With 5 or more students, it is possible for a student to not participate in the discussion and no one will notice. The second disadvantage is that with 5 or more students, the possibility of side conversations being introduced within the group becomes increasingly likely, and few of these side conversations meet the instructional intent of the teacher. The third structural component of the FSGPT is the practice of using pre-planned seed questions. The purpose of these questions is to guide the student conversation toward the desired learning outcome. This ensures that students are in the position to better make the connections that are critical to the content being presented. For example, after 10 minutes of instruction, the teacher stops and gives the following directions. Now, I want you to briefly discuss with your partner the difference between the English monarchy and the American presidency. Or, discuss with your partners finish the question. The teacher in the example has provided seed questions that keep the students focused on content and allow the teacher to determine the general level of understanding. Power zone. The final structural component of FSGPT is provided when the teacher remains in the power zone throughout the student conversations. While in the power zone, the teacher is in the best position to ensure that the students remain focused on the task at hand, participating in an academic discussion. Also, critical insights, examples, and connections that are made by individual students can be shared with the entire class. In addition, any points of misunderstanding made by individual students or shared by the collective class can be addressed either immediately or during the next section of the teacher talk. Adult language / student language. As longtime practitioners, the authors are convinced that numerous bilingual students populate every classroom in America. Not bilingual in the terms of national languages, although that does exist, but bilingual in terms of the ability to speak and comprehend both adult language and student language. This issue, as it relates to instruction, is that As a teacher, one primary form of feedback on the quality of lessons is provided by the students who can most easily converse with an adult. Due to their ability to converse with every person in the class, these students are engaged, inquisitive, often insightful. Unfortunately, the feedback these students provide the teacher often hides the fact that the other students, those who do not speak adult, are essentially swimming upstream, and that the longer the teacher talks, the further behind these students fall. Fortunately, the fundamental practice of frequent small group purposeful talk about the learning provides a remedy to this common classroom malady. Time to translate. One should recognize that in general, a student who understands adult speak has an advantage in understanding the lesson over the student who only understands student speak. By providing students with the opportunity to discuss with each other the topic at hand every 10 to 15 minutes, the students who understand both adult speak and student speak have the opportunity to translate students for the students who only speak student. Hey, Nessie. From an anecdotal perspective, this simple process has a dramatic effect on the climate and culture of a classroom. Students quickly take ownership of the learning, and with an overall student focus shifting to academic inquiry, as opposed to tracking time and staving off boredom, learning improves. As teachers become more adept in selecting seed questions, and students become more adept as their communication skills, numerous embedded benefits to the quality of instruction will quickly become apparent. Student retention. First and foremost, the fundamental practice of frequent small group purposeful talk makes a significant positive impact on retention. There are a number of reasons for this, but the discussion will begin with the most obvious. During the course of instruction, teachers with even minimal experience quickly begin to sense that there are some students in the classroom who truly are at the beginning to understand the concept that is being taught. At that point, it will behoove the teacher to have a process, practice, or strategy that would cement that learning in place and make it permanent. One way for a teacher to do this would be to create an opportunity for the students to teach the skill or concept to someone else. A small group purposeful talk session provides this opportunity. Additionally, during the course of instruction, the teacher will realize that along with the students who get it, there are some students who are struggling to understand the concept being taught. At this point, the teacher is faced with a decision. The teacher can continue to push ahead at full speed, leaving student understanding in his or her wake. This unfortunately is an all too common practice that the authors do not recommend. The teacher could stop and deliver the instruction again, often more slowly, more loudly, and with increased frustration. Again, though a common practice, this is not a recommended action. The teacher could also stop and provide the opportunity for a brief peer-to-peer tutoring session. This is the teacher response that the authors recommend. FSGPT provides opportunities for students who get it better and for students who do not get it to hear the material again, but this time in a language student talk that they better understand. This reinforces the intent of the lesson for some of the class and immediately reteaches the material for those in the class who missed the intent of the lesson the first time it was presented. And have an opportunity to reflect and have some small group purposeful talk. I need to move my chair and get some water. The primacy recency effect. The primacy/recency effect. FSGPT allows teachers to better harness the power of the primacy-recency effect. The early researches on this effect dates back to the 1880s, when Hermann Ebbinghaus published his work on the processes of learning and forgetting. The primacy/recency effect, simply stated, points out that in a learning episode, we tend to remember best that which comes first, and remember second best that which comes last. We tend to remember least that which comes just past the middle of the episode. Most teachers in the course of instruction have just one start and one finish in their lesson cycle, the beginning of the class and the end of the class. This is yet another reason why a quality lesson frame is such a powerful instructional tool. When the brain is most alert, the lesson frame highlights what is most important about the lesson, the critical instructional concept, primacy, and the student's final demonstration of that concept, recency. Fortunately, the brain does not track time just in terms of class periods. It also tracks time in terms of stage changes. A state change is simply a change in physical or mental state. By introducing multiple state changes during the course of a class period, the teacher is able to create multiple starts and finishes, thus facilitating the possible creation of not just vibrant memories at the actual beginning and ending of class, but multiple vibrant memories throughout the class. The chart below illustrates this process. Traditional 55-minute class period. There's an activity, relative time, type of memory, and start of class, primacy, and vibrant. Okay, so let's go ahead and look at that. We've got this table up here, activity, relative time, and type of memory. And here we go. The activity is the start, the instruction, the end of the class, the time, the primacy, the middle, the recency, and the type of memory, vibrant, less vibrant over time, which would be that middle, and recency would be vibrant. And below that we have a 55-minute class period with a single small group purposeful talk session included. Here we go. Start of class, instruction, stop instruction, start discussion, stop, start, instruction, end of class. And the corresponding elements of it. Vibrant memories, the timing of it. It's all listed right there. Okay, as the charts above so clearly illustrate, in a traditional classroom, students are left with two vibrant memories at the end of class period. If during the same class, the teacher introduces just one session of small group purposeful talk. At the end of the class period, I'll move a little bit over here. If during the same class period the teacher introduces just one session of small group purposeful talk at the end of the class period, students could have access to as many as 6 vibrant memories relating to the content. Based on their experience and ongoing observations, the authors firmly believe that regardless of a student's innate cognitive ability, the more content he or she remembers, the better he or she will perform academically. Attention span. As previously discussed, the use of FSGPT introduces state changes during the course of instruction. Time for another state change. Okay, state changes. In addition to leveraging the primacy-recency effect, these state changes can also provide the teacher with an effective vehicle for managing student attention spans. Consider the typical adult. Under normal circumstances, this person will have an attention span of 10 to 15 minutes. For teens, the figure is 8 to 10 minutes. And for students 12 years under, the figures become even more drastically reduced. Allen, 2009. But as is the case with the primacy/recency effect, a state change can reset the attention span clock. By introducing a small group purposeful talk session, the teacher can circumvent the loss of student attention and the ensuing wave of boredom that follows. Consider the typical classroom. As is the case with most teachers, this teacher begins class teaching at full speed, understanding that he or she must cover a certain amount of material in a set period of time. For the first 10 to 15 minutes of class time, the class operates well and students are attentive. During the next 10 to 15 minutes of the class, students begin to get a little restless. The teacher most likely responds with some individual student corrections, an attempt to pick up the pace of the instructional task, or both. Finally, during the next 10 to 15 minutes of class, students will often begin to get unruly, leaving the teacher to resort to either the big bribe or the big threat. The big bribe is, if you just behave, I will give you some type of bribe. The big threat is, if you don't behave, you will all go to the office, or some such equally onerous outcome. At the point of the big bribe or the big threat, the class has been crushed by a wave of boredom. The strategic use of frequent small group purposeful talk allows the teacher to reset student attention spans and surf the boredom wave. When a teacher tells the class, let's stop what we are doing, turn to your partner and discuss, the teacher has created a state change. This state change resets the attention span, allowing students to continue to successfully focus on the learning outcome. Now the teacher has created a classroom instructional cycle that looks similar to the following: 10 to 15 minutes of engaged instruction, followed by 1 to 3 minutes of engaged conversation, followed by another 10 to 15 minutes of engaged instruction, followed by another 1 to 3 minutes of engaged conversation, and so on. This teacher is able to purposefully manage the amount of effective instructional minutes and maintains high levels of student engagement, instructional rigor, and relevance. Up to this point, the arguments for FSGPT have centered on its effect on student retention of the content, but one should also consider the effect FSGPT has on the level of instructional rigor and relevance. In the current educational environment, teachers are constantly reminded of the importance of increasing both the rigor and relevance of instruction. The concept of rigor, or the level of cognition as described by Dr. Benjamin Bloom in his now famous taxonomy, is almost universally recognized by teachers. In 2000, Anderson et al. Published a revised cognitive taxonomy. Bloom's original taxonomy, the amended taxonomy, and descriptors of student tasks that correlate to levels of cognition are presented in the chart below. Okay. We have a table there, lead your school, rigor groupings, low rigor, mid rigor, high rigor, original Bloom categories, new Bloom categories, and descriptions of student work. So from low rigor, things like define, to high rigor, to verify. The concept of relevance, which is gaining prominence in the discussions on instruction, represents the attempt to have the student connect to the content on a personal level. The consensus of curriculum experts is that currently both the rigor and relevance of typical classroom instruction is lacking. Based on personal observations and the analysis of the data from tens of thousands of classroom observations, Kane and Laird, unpublished research 2010, the authors cannot refute this. To help teachers increase rigor and relevance of their lessons, many curriculum experts offer a solution similar to the following. Teachers, we're going to pull you from the classroom for some extended training on instructional rigor and/or relevance. Then we expect you to spend significant time developing and planning lessons that reflect this training. Finally, we expect you to teach these new rigorous and relevant lessons in addition to the lessons you are already expected to teach. Is it any wonder why teachers leave the profession? The author's foray into this fray is limited to the following two beliefs. First, the issues relating to the rigor and relevance of classroom instruction are driven as much, if not more, by curricular content than teacher decisions. Most curricula are written in the content area, naturally, and are presented at the knowledge and comprehension level. Classroom instruction reflects this. Second, improving the delivery of instruction rather than improving the quality of the content better serves the teacher. FSGPT provides the means to do so. Provides the means to do just that, allowing any teacher to quickly and easily increase the rigor and relevance of any lesson. How this works is surprisingly straightforward. First, consider instructional relevance. Given the three basic categories of relevance discussed earlier, in-content, cross-content, and real-world, when students engage in discussions about the content, they bring in familiar examples which they use in conversation to describe and explain the learning topic. Those examples come from all three relevance areas, but primarily they seem to come from outside the content area. Thus, instead of the teacher spending precious time trying to emphasize the relevance of the content to the students, which in many cases actually seems to decrease relevance for the student, the teacher simply provides students with the opportunity to create their own relevance. This is a solution the authors wholeheartedly recommend that every teacher work to implement. Second, consider instructional rigor. It does not matter at what level of rigor overall instruction is delivered. Through the use of the seed question provided to the small groups, the teacher can increase the level of rigor at will. Again, consider a simple geometry lesson, a lesson where the teacher is simply introducing the shape of a triangle and the shape of a square. The overall lesson might focus on the recognition of the two shapes. Mastery of this lesson would entail the students operating at the knowledge and comprehension levels of cognition. However, in the course of the lesson, through the use of FSGPT, the teacher could ask a question such as, how are triangles and squares similar? In the 1 to 3 minutes students spend answering this question, the level of instructional rigor increases from comprehension to analysis as represented on Bloom's taxonomy. As further proof of how this practice can be used with any lesson, the content has been presented in this book can be used as an example. If a trainer was using this book as an instructional resource, at this point the trainer could introduce the following short discussion activity. Teachers, we've now discussed 3 of the 5 fundamental practices of effective instruction. Frame the lesson, work in the power zone, and frequent small group purposeful talk about the learning. Now with your discussion buddy, quietly discuss how you would implement these 3 practices in your classroom. You will have 3 minutes to discuss this, and then we will share our thoughts with the entire group. The discussion of a list of practices generally falls within the knowledge and comprehension levels of Bloom's taxonomy. But the use of this question moves the rigor to at least the application level. As an added bonus, because the seed question forced the learner to consider how he or she would personally use these practices in another setting, his or her own classroom, the relevance of the lesson shifted to the real-world level. Thus, a simple 3-minute discussion after the introduction of 3 simple practices took a low-rigor, low-relevance lesson and shifted it to the level of mid-rigor, high-relevance. The authors hope, based on these 2 examples, the reader will recognize it, that it is as much more efficient to use teacher time to develop a handful of academically rigorous question stems. See the chart, Talk Like a Genius question stems below, to use during a lesson, as opposed to spending time creating an entire bank of new, more rigorous and relevant lessons. Putting it all together. For a practice that seems simple on paper, effective FSGP implementation requires deliberate planning, execution, and reflection on the part of the teacher. Consider first the act of allowing students to talk purposefully and academically. In the initial attempts, this effort will often be messy. A student-to-student conversation is almost always social in nature. In addition, many students are not used to talking to each other academically, having rarely been given the opportunity. This academic type of conversation will be awkward for them at first. but given multiple supervised and guided opportunities, they will rapidly improve. Additionally, the development of effective seed questions requires some planning on the part of the teacher. Without advanced preparation, the questions the teachers develop on the fly are either closed questions, a question that can be answered with a single word or short phrase, or low rigor, knowledge or comprehension, or both. This is not because teachers are unable to develop more academically rigorous questions. It is because under conditions of stress, the brain defaults to the lowest common denominator, i.e. low rigor questions with simple, obvious answers. The attempt on the part of the teacher to instruct a class, manage a class, and provide meaningful questions certainly qualifies as a stressful condition. A successful way to counter this stress is with the use of a question stem wall. A question stem wall is simply a bulletin board or other designated space that has open-ended question stems posted. The purpose of an open-ended question is to provoke thought, reflection, or have the learner make connections. On the question stem wall, these open-ended questions are categorized by the level of thinking required to answer them, the rigor level, and they are visible and available to all. There's a list of the type of questions. Smart questions, smarter questions, and the smartest questions. When first introduced to FSGPT, many teachers want to implement the practice immediately. They start with the best of intentions, begin to teach, and by the time they remember to stop and let the students talk, numerous opportunities have passed. This is simply because the teacher has yet to develop a stop and talk rhythm. An easy way to quickly create this rhythm is to purchase an inexpensive kitchen timer, an egg timer. At the beginning of class, set the timer for 10 minutes. When the timer goes off, the teacher simply completes his or her thought, and then the student discusses the introduced concepts using a pre-planned seed question. Once the students complete their discussions, the teacher resets the timer for another 10 minutes and repeats the cycle. There's a twist to the egg timer strategy that many teachers find effective. The authors have named this the busy teacher time strategy, and it works in the following manner. The busy teacher realizes it will be difficult to manage the classroom, teach the content, and now track time in 10 to 15 minute increments. So the busy teacher does not even attempt to try this. Rather, the busy teacher walks into the classroom with the timer in hand, locates his or her most behaviorally challenged students, presents the timer to that student, and says something along the lines of, "I have a very important job for you. I want you to help me teach the class. You want to try?" The busy teacher then quickly teaches the student how to use the timer. Now the teacher remains focused on managing the class, teaching the content, and stopping when the timer goes off. The student takes care of the rest. Frequent small group purposeful talk about the learning is a powerful instructional tool. Its effective use has a tremendous impact on student behavior, student retention, and the depth and quality of the presented content. In fact, based on the use of this practice in numerous settings with learners of all ages and all ability levels, the authors are willing to make this promise to teachers. You can teach what you have always taught. You can teach it almost the same way you have always taught it. Just add frequent small group purposeful talk. More of your students will learn more of what you want them to know.